This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the 4th season, and I'm your host, Liang Kai Sing, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is on girl math and the gender gap in STEM field. We have Dr Sierin Lim, Associate Professor of Bioengineering from Nanyang Technological University and Associate Dean of Global Partnerships at the NTU Graduate College. She is championing community developments at NTU and in Singapore, particularly women in STEM initiatives. We also have Ainul Md Razib. She's a full-stack software engineer and tech career influencer, founder of AinLovesCode and member of Women Who Code. Welcome to the podcast today.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for inviting us.
Okay. In 2018, Singapore's adjusted gender pay gap is 6%, and Singapore women are significantly less confident in their math ability compared to men, according to a recent study by NTU and also by our guest today, Dr. Sierin Lim. This finding is rather eyebrow-raising because from what we know, girls in Singapore are performing quite on par with boys in math. So we really wanted to ask, why is the percentage of women in STEM careers so low? And then how can gender perceptions on STEM be changed in this field? Perhaps we can start with Dr. Sierin Lim first, and then we go to Ainul.
Yeah, so thanks. Before we answer that question, I think what we had tried to do a few years ago through a program that was funded by the Ministry of Education called the Promotion of Women in Engineering, Research and Science, abbreviated as POWERS program. We tried to do a small landscape study on the ability of students or the Singapore populations, particularly in high school, on their mathematics ability. And partially that's through the analyzing the PISA score. And what we found is interesting that the students at high school, at A-levels, and through the PISA test, they actually perform equally well as boys. The girls perform equally well as boys. But interestingly, as they progress through their academic career, they do seem to diverge and picked up non-STEM careers or whatnot. One of the correlations that we found was that perhaps there's some confidence issues that kind of tagged into as these girls progress in their academic career. And I think there's certainly a few questions that we would like to answer in terms of why would they choose STEM over the others or the other way around as well. And that question, I think, is an important to ask because many of the data points that we have gotten actually have been based on Western population. And there are not that many studies done in the Asian population. And as a follow-up of that study that we did on just trying to understand the baseline, we also tried to do nationally representative survey on the Singapore population. And what we found was that there are, as you mentioned, about less than 60% of women who were trained in STEM actually stayed in STEM, right? So that's compared to 70% of men. And that was an interesting finding, we thought. There are some career activities that are getting equal preference by women in Singapore, which actually is highly related to STEM careers. But for some reason, they don't pick it up. This is in contrast to what people found in the Western population. So if the women actually like the activities that STEM career could have offered, so why are they not picking them up? So that's the question that we want to answer, and we are trying to get some more funding to further study this.
Maybe go to Ainul first. Yeah. Since you studied STEM in your university degree, so maybe we can ask you, why do you decide to pursue this career then? And in your experience, was there any difficulty when you pursue this?
I think for my journey into a STEM major, information systems, and then as a full-stack software developer, I think two things that stood out to me compared to many other aspiring women in tech is that my parents were really supportive of what I want to study in university. My mom is a math teacher as well, so there wasn't really, don't go for this subject because it's full of guys. And the second thing is that for most of my classes, at least from my experience, I didn't feel like my gender was a barrier to discussing about asking questions, about building projects, about participating in class discussions. But when I was indirectly becoming a diversity advocate through my social media, sharing about my tech career journey, I found that actually a lot of women were messaging me, commenting and saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know that there's a woman like you who's not only working in tech, but who has studied tech, who is doing a technical role that is closely STEM related rather than so-called the usual more soft skills related careers. So I feel like when it comes to why girls and women don't stick around for long in STEM, whether that's through studies or through their careers, it really depends on the support networks that she has. Yes, everyone will tell you, oh, imposter syndrome, everyone goes through it. You need to stay strong, you need to prove yourself. But having a support network is vital to making you stay rather than just leaving the industry. And to be perfectly honest, in Singapore, we still have a largely conservative and traditional society where careers like STEM are largely not only just dominated by men, but it is a field that isn't strongly encouraged in girls, because girls and women, especially in Asian societies, they are traditionally, we are seen as having to be softer, having to be kinder, in arguably a largely emotionless field like tech, where everything is to the point, very direct. It is difficult for many girls and women to have that strong self-confidence that will make them not only stay in the industry, but to continually grow in their role. Because if everyone around them, their support network, tell them, oh, you need to be kind, you need to be humble, you need to listen to other people more than you speak, then that's very difficult when it comes to actively playing a role in contributing to her job or to her studies.
Okay.
So I feel like that's an important point. And I feel another aspect, for example, some parents, they don't strongly encourage their girls and daughters to study tech, is because they are concerned by the fact that it's male dominated. Would their daughter be safe if most of their team members are male? Would they have the mental strength to deal with the passive aggression, with gaslighting, and all those aspects that many women experience, even if they are not in a male-dominated field? And another thing is, if their daughter pursues a STEM career, could that make them seem as more masculine? Because these girls and women have to be so-called stronger. So I feel like those are some aspects why many girls and women, it's tricky for them to not only continually strive in the career, but also to really believe that they fit in such a male-dominated STEM space, if that makes sense.
Okay. I think you touched on a lot of aspects of this gender gap. I think we have to slowly unpack all the different aspects. Very interesting thing when you mentioned about there are some parents who will not encourage their daughters to enter STEM fields because it could be male-oriented, or whether is it safe or is it too masculine. What does it mean? Dr. Lim, what did your research show about this aspect then?
It's not my research, but there is somebody else who did this work. Actually, it's a very important aspect. I think the environment at which the girls are exposed to, given it's the home, at school, or at the university, or even eventually in the career space, is very important, right? So then having a supportive environment, parents who are supportive and encouraging. From my own experience, I think I just realized this lately, that my dad never actually said no, like you can't study these things. And my mom, of course, is very supportive of whatever I do. But I think it's important that having that kind of encouragement from immediate people when we were growing up. It was never occurred to me that I could not do STEM. And of course, and I got really good teachers who encouraged me as well, and then saw the potential and whatnot. And then I just continued that way. So that would be my main thoughts as well, to build a supportive environment from the nuclear level in the family to the education system to the working environment. And I think that what we would like to do through my program Powers is also that thesis in terms of building a supportive environment for women in STEM. And one of the other aspects that we would like to also learn is that, let's say that we have managed to recruit students to study STEM and then continue mentoring them through their academic career. And then once they get to the job environment, how is it in the industry? How are they perceived? Is the environment supportive? So that is a question that we actually get another funding for that. And then you have to wait for us to actually get the data out, hopefully next year, particularly for mid-career women. And so what is actually going on there? What is the role of these snide comments, for example, or supportive environment, basically, in STEM? And then what we found interesting was that many of the companies we approached are very interested in participating and then try to see how these questions are being addressed in the company. And to our surprise, there are a lot of companies who have some DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within the company itself. Yeah.
Okay, so that's very interesting because, one thing is about the environment, the workplace, but the other thing which I know also mentioned was about how it is male-oriented, and I guess in a way it's also related to the fact that in society, so in society, a lot of people think that men are better at math, and on TikTok there's this thing called girl math, and it's just all these young women were saying that they use girl math to rationalize their spending habits in inventive ways that don't always add up mathematically. And I know you're on TikTok. So what do you think about this trend, and how does it affect stereotypes?
So I feel like an interesting point about girl math for me is why it makes sense to me. And I feel there's also the trend of these female employees also explaining to their male colleagues in sort of an analytical way that, hey, this is what girl math is about. Let me explain to you guys. And although it's branded as girl math, right? Some of the female employees, they do understand girl math. So the reason why we label it as girl math is because, to me at least, when we think about girl math, about girls and women justifying their purchasing decisions, they, like what you say, it's an inventive way of justifying their purchasing decisions, even though it might not be the most efficient way to use money, right?
Yep.
But I feel like one point that stands out to me is that, oh, yeah, sure, it might be more expensive. It might not actually be a discount, but they feel happier. They find more enjoyment getting that, even though it might not be the smartest choice. And I feel that's where it stands out, right? Where a lot of math, right? We don't usually bring in ethics and emotions. For example, the discussion about AI. Everyone is raving about the amazingness of AI and not enough about the ethics. And I feel that's where girls, like the discussion of women versus men, STEM versus emotions come into play, and where it's conflicts.
But doesn't it push stereotypes that women cannot do math and handle their finances well?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because when we think about girl math, it's really, to put it into a simple explanation, is how a woman makes her purchasing decisions. It isn't just,
they are bad at
optimizing
math
for every dollar.
Okay.
I don't think it has to do with being bad at math. Arguably, it's bad at economic math. If you want to optimize dollar for dollar, then it's definitely, most girl math probably won't be the most optimized. But if you consider, if I buy a bag that's expensive, but that bag lasts me for a year compared to a cheaper bag that lasts me for 6 months, then that more expensive bag is more worth it. So if we were to look at it just at the math, just at the dollar, then the expensive bag isn't worth it compared to a cheaper bag. But if you consider, like, for example, the utility of the product, the enjoyment of having, oh my gosh, I treated myself, I have such a pretty bag compared to a cheaper bag, then when you mix in the less mathy parts, the stick aspects that cannot be easily measured by math, then it makes that calculation less serious, and it becomes girl math rather than optimizing for every dollar. And I feel like that's an interesting part that I find amusement in, because to me, it makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah, but how about Dr. Lim then? What's your take on this TikTok trend?
This is becoming a nice conversation here, because I actually never really heard about this girl math until really recently. And one of the things that I found it interesting was Einstein was like the use of math in justifying shopping habit or shopping or purchases, right? And then I thought that was like an interesting way of using math to make it more appealing to women or to girls. If it's just looking at the purpose of just, making it, you can just make the application of math to certain things. But is it the only way, just trying to make it more interesting or more, for that purpose, I'm okay with that. But then if they're trying to brand it as if like making math to justify all this kind of, it's a separate argument in terms of the purpose versus the application. So I wanted to bring forth something else beyond girl math. So there's one part that I thought was interesting through another interactions I had with a friend of mine who's like a communications major, former journalist, and a musician in a way. We came up with something through our discussions, like a lot of the mathematicians or people who actually studied math for the pleasure and passion of math actually were also musicians. And what I thought was like, hey, why don't we talk about math like as an artistic math? And I can give you two examples for that, right? Rather than girl math, how about artistic math? If you look at mathematics at the purest form, I think it's all about abstractions. You can describe everything from a square, a circle, a polygon. Everything could be described with a simple formula. And this actually goes beyond just the things that we can see in our three-dimensional world, right? So it's also something beyond that. And I think that AI and all those things cannot advance without super high-level mathematics. And if we go back to the art part and you look at music, how do you actually touch music? It's intangible. But if you look at how it's being counted, you have one. You can do like one half a stroke, like. Or, right? So that's all about counting. And that's about mathematics. Like, it's the most basic thing that we use every day. We count.
Okay.
So that's music and math.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it.
I thought that was a nice thing that I don't think people use that much. And then another way that I thought, which I've encountered, and I came to realization when my friend at the National Institute of Education, who is an artist, and she's teaching art education, and asked me, what is creativity in your field? I was like, I don't look at creativity in STEM as something that they don't come together. But then she asked me to do that talk. I thought like, okay, I do know that we're actually pretty creative. All people in STEM are very creative. How do you think we actually think about a way to come up with a car, or for that matter, a rocket ship that would bring people to Mars and the moon and beyond? Like, those are all creative people. They just use the creativity in a different way. And one thing that I found, if we were going to bring in, again, artistic math, there is a guy called Vanderbilt, I think, that tried to come up with a formula to describe every single thing in nature. Orchid is one of the most interesting flowers in my mind because you can look at them, cut them right in the middle, you have almost perfect symmetry. How do you even describe that? How do you even describe, if you have a knowledge of STEM or biology or chemistry or whatever, you can describe such a mundane thing in the world, in nature, in much more precision and much more vocabulary, I think, in terms of how do you describe that. And to me, symmetry is described with mathematics, right? And this particular guy, Vanderbilt, was basically coming up with the various kind of mathematical formula that actually describes such symmetry and fractals and then all these different structures, geometric patterns. And I thought if you kind of take the time to think about it and reflect on these things, and then I was like, I just think that mathematics is beautiful.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we were talking about girl math, and now we're talking about artistic math, right? But actually, when we talk about girl math, what I wanted to bring so is about innate aptitude. There's always this thing about people saying that women are not so good at math. It's an innate aptitude versus could it be socialized or could it be discriminated? As in, maybe they internalize the thought that they are bad at math. Dr. Lim, what do you think about this then?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate if people do think that. And I think sometimes, I don't know if that thought permeates through the society. I don't think it was so bad in Asia in the past. When I came, I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. We actually have quite a good number of students studying STEM, for example, and that is including mathematics. What is interesting in NTU, actually, one of the few majors that sees almost parity is mathematics. So we get from like really big gender gap, and then for some reason, our mathematics major got going more toward parity. Parity meaning like between 45 and 65 of gender ratio in the study. So that I thought was unfortunate if it is being told that girls are not good at math. I don't know how the perception comes through, but I thought Singapore was doing quite well. But recently, I have heard that these are some things that has started to come up in the younger students. I don't know where it came from, but I thought that was an interesting observation. Are they really not that good? I don't think so, because the PISA score showed that actually they are doing as well. And even if they are not doing as well, it does not mean that they cannot do it in a later stage of their life, right? So it might have just been that particular segment of mathematics that was not that interesting to them. And believe me, I've gone through these things. And then my education, mathematics, it goes from arithmetic to geometry to all sorts of different kinds. And then I think that you don't have to be the top students to study and to major in mathematics, right? So you can be using that concept and then study them, and then eventually perhaps use that to apply that to economics, to apply that to chemistry, and engineering, of course, and then various things, including shopping, or calculating the distance from which path should I go if I wanted to go from NTU to come to this place for the recording. I think that has a lot of applications, and I think that some people are better in that than others, and that's pretty much for any field, right? So I think that we should still encouraging students, and then rather than telling them you're not that good in math, yeah, you keep trying.
Okay, so I know, then what about you then? Have you ever been told that girls should not be so good at math, or do you think it's a form of socialization and discrimination then?
I think for the longest time, I was lucky that in my career and in university especially, I was lucky enough not to experience blatantly that, hey, you suck at coding or you suck at math. I didn't get that.
Okay.
I know I was not that good in coding.
Actually, it was when I make social media content, right? For like the past 3 years. So basically, when some of my videos go viral because, hey, I share about my tech journey, I share about my vlogs, attending networking events and saying that, hey, I'm a software developer. I was like at this event sharing my experience. And amidst some of the comments that saying, hey, oh my gosh, this is so cool, there are also some comments who are saying, oh, are you really a software developer? You got your job because you are a woman. Do you just know how to type in hello world and you call yourself a coder already? So
Okay.
it was through anonymous comments that had that socialization that you mentioned.
Oh, okay.
But I was lucky that by that time, I was already working. I had a strong enough support network. My networking has helped me make a lot of friends who tell me that, oh my gosh, they like you having a social media brand, that's so cool. You should do more of it. This is great, right? To share your journey, not only about your tech journey, but also the idea that I was a software developer in itself was cool to them. And I feel like that's one thing, right? In my case, I was very public facing. I was on social media. Anyone in Singapore and overseas could see my content. And I was lucky enough that I had that network to help me keep going. But I think if I did not prioritize networking, if I did not have a thick skin to already deal with, I wouldn't be on this podcast, first of all.
Okay.
I probably would not be on social media anymore. So I think when you think about socialization, it does have an effect. It does have an impact. And during my worst days, they definitely do get to me. But when you have a strong support network, you are able to tell yourself that, hey, this happens. I've earned my place. I know what I'm doing. The comments that I get, most of them are made by people who either are not even in the industry, who don't even have the knowledge that I do, or they don't know the struggle that I've been through to get to this point. Because let's say a guy with 2 years of experience and a woman with 2 years of experience, right? The journey to get there, I can guarantee is not the same, because the woman will for sure experience higher levels of discrimination, higher levels of imposter syndrome. Maybe they might even have difficulty explaining to their parents, to their friends, to people in their circle that, hey, I'm going to pursue this job, this subject. That journey is usually harder for minorities, and in a male-dominated field like STEM, that biggest minority is women. So that's my point of view, at least.
Dr. Lim?
I think it's partially socialization. And I think that just trying to come up with some fun examples, I think, how math is being used. Of course, I myself went through several levels of college math. And then at some point, you realize that you hit the interest level that I could actually get and grasp in the abstraction of mathematics. But I think that is not something that we should discourage. We should encourage them. And then I have seen people who struggled with math in some part of their education, but then and when they got to college and when they got a little older, somehow the neurons snap together and then they just have this ability to think through in different ways. I think we should just keep doing it.
Okay. So Dr. Lim, your research, or maybe the research you cited, shows that a significant number of STEM-educated women, after they graduate, they end up working in non-related occupations. So then they have achieved the hurdle of getting a degree, but then what are the barriers or challenges do women face in transitioning from STEM education to STEM careers? And how can this be eliminated?
Okay, opportunities are opportunities, right? And then I think that many times what I have heard is that when you see the same kind of resume, sometimes when you see a male name and then those resumes are more likely to get picked up. And I think those are some of the biases that kind of ingrained perhaps in the society. And it is one of the questions that with the development of AI, taking more and more automations in terms of screening, would that kind of bias be eliminated? That's one thing in terms of picking up screenings, resumes. And then another part that I understood also is that women tend not to apply for a job that has not 90% of checking the tick boxes on the job descriptions or job requirements, while men, even they just have maybe 50%, they'll be happily applying for those jobs. So I think that's another part that contributes to the lack of perhaps even widening the number of applicants in the pool, and women just self-screen from not being in the race, right? So that's the two major questions or concerns, I think, that have been put forth and some of the contributors for that drop.
But as what Ainul said, in a way, role modeling, would that be important in order to encourage women to go into this career?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there's a lot of perceptions, there's a lot of questions like, what am I going to do after I graduate with a STEM degree? And so Powers did a small pilot with the MNC here in Singapore. And one of the outcomes that we surveyed the students, and then what we did actually for that mentorship program was students from the second, third year trying to understand, or maybe they're graduating, and put them through a 3-month program, very structured. And we're happy to actually share the structure of this program. It basically helps them to understand what they want in the first month, and then try to understand what the company is doing. This is beyond traditional mentoring. And then try to really to understand what the job actually entails and how the mentors could actually share with them exactly what they are doing day to day and how they survive in their job. What is interesting is out of all the students who actually went through this, they came with an attitude that was like, I'm not so sure if I wanted to actually go into the STEM career. It's so hard, and maybe whatever it is that they have perception on. But then after going through that program of 3 months, and quite casual mentoring actually, but then it was very structured, they actually had shifted their perception, and then they have strongly agreed to actually consider STEM as a potential career for themselves. So that would actually be very important to have, not just role model. I think role model is great to have, but then there's somebody that we sort of idolize and we don't really touch them. But then if you have a mentor, then you would have somebody that you can actually hear and feel and then connect with, which actually is more important.
Okay, I know. So then growing up, do you have any role model or mentor to encourage you?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, there isn't really a single role model, right? So I think for me, it isn't just, let's say, my parents. I try to find bits of inspiration and lessons from everyone I meet, actually. A show that I learn, what can I learn from it, or what my parents say and do, what my siblings do. I feel like that's possibly another approach that I've taken that has helped me have a thick skin, right? I don't necessarily limit myself to any particular role model, but maybe I listen more to people who resonate more with me. I remember when I was younger, I'm like, what, mid-20s? I'm still quite young.
Okay.
But I remember even before university, whenever there's news reports, right, in the newspapers, I was always looking for people that they were the same demographics as me. So in my case, people like Malay names, women wearing the headscarf, women in general. And I found there are just so few. So my approach from learning from role models and realizing that I can be a role model, it is really realizing that, oh, everyone I meet has something that I can learn, that I can teach. And even though someone might be older than me or more experienced than me, our journeys might not be the same. The lessons that we learn might be different. And even though I might so-called be younger or less experienced, I can also share something, share a lesson that they had not really internalized or realized earlier. It's really the idea of what can I learn from this person? And what about this person makes me feel inspired to be myself?
So actually what you said, I know earlier also is about the masculine culture in workplaces, right? So it links to my next question also. What role can companies and organizations play in creating an inclusive and supporting environment for women in STEM, from recruitment to career advancement? So maybe I'll go to Dr. Lim first.
I think that many companies are aware that diversity actually brings in good perspective and that could translate to company growth, etc., right? Because then it gives a balance and diversity of views, etc. So I think with that realization, and this also ties into sustainability of the company, once that realization kicks in, I think that the company would actively try to create an environment that is safe, not only for women, but also for all the employees. And that is an important aspect, that realization. Then, of course, everything else would then be coming up with programs that would encourage women or creating a safe space, putting up training programs for empowering the men to become allies, etc. And then how to just being respectful to each other in the workplace.
Then what's your experience like working in your workplaces?
I feel like one very important thing that more companies need to be aware about is that making a more diverse space isn't just programs or workshops or one-off events. It is truly a continual effort, because that's what building a diverse community is about. It isn't just, oh, we are helping this community. It's also that culture, that exchange of information. So when it comes to supporting women, it comes with multiple pillars, right? One of it is allowing women to share their concerns about being treated differently without being gaslighted,
Okay.
without immediately saying that this is untrue. The other thing is letting women speak up and share their experiences and taking them seriously. This isn't exactly a company-wide thing. It's more of specific employees. But I think for many women, they are seen as women first rather than the employee first. So what I mean by this is that in a team, right, and you have a woman in that team, and that woman gives an idea or shares a point of view, you will hear many stories, especially online, of women saying, hey, I gave an idea, they didn't take it, but another male colleague gave the same idea and they took it seriously.
Oh,
And
I saw this meme before.
exactly, it's not just a
Yeah.
meme. The reason why it's become a meme is because it happens so much and people just don't take it seriously. And the tricky part about these instances is that until someone calls it out and it's taken seriously, for many people who are the ones ignoring women and taking men seriously, they don't see it as they are the problem, or they react with hostility. So that's where having a culture of mutual respect on communication comes in. And that kind of culture is very difficult to inculcate, especially when you don't have a lot of resources. Like certain industries, which I won't name, having that profit and having that output, that's the very first priority compared to having that welcoming culture, because in many industries, especially the more male dominated, sometimes it's faster to just push through, ignore issues as long as something is being done, as long as we are getting profit, as long as we are having output. But if we genuinely see a problem with the lack of female representation in certain industries, that is an issue that we need to keep talking about. And although for many people, the discussion is, oh, how can we get more women? It isn't just getting more women. It's also getting more minorities in general. One can argue that many like ethnic minorities or people who are just not the typical person in an industry, they experience many of the same issues, different flavors, but generally the same issues. The idea that they are being seen as inferior, they are being disrespected because they are not the perfect mold. They are not molded by the same cutout, if that makes sense. So it starts from having that open culture and making sure that everyone is genuinely respected for their skills and experience rather than their demographics, as well as providing resources for the company side, providing expert resources for people to close this awareness gap of how minorities, how women are treated differently. Because I've had some instances where people say, hey, I have daughters, I know female colleagues that have mentioned this to me. What can I do? And suddenly it becomes the burden of women who are already like experiencing all these different things to educate people who are not the minority, who don't have that experience. Arguably, as some people would say, it shouldn't be the oppressed responsibility to educate. It should be really people who want to be allies, right? It should be on their responsibility to seek out resources on their own or to find experts rather than rely on the closest possible person to educate them. And hopefully that makes sense, because I think that's where once companies realize that they are the ones with the resources to encourage that, to genuinely build that culture over a long period of time, that's when I feel that actual positive change can happen. Otherwise, if it's just going to be one-off efforts, yes, maybe the positive effects will stay for maybe a month or two, maybe a year, but without consistent reminders, because humans need reminders, people won't remember that this is still a long-standing issue.
Okay. What you said just now was very interesting, because you said that, oh, it's not just that companies should just hire a lot of women and then that will solve the issue. Because I guess there's also another issue that you can hire like 100 women, but they are all in low-paying jobs. And then you hire like 10 men who are their bosses and managers. Then there's not really equality also, right?
That's
In a
actually
way.
a point. I now that you mentioned it, I actually raised this point before with another friend who interviewed me for roughly the same topic. And
Okay.
I personally like to call it a diversity sieve. Let's say you want to fill something with water and that thing, it has a lot of holes, a sieve basically. You want to transport water using a sieve. So how do you transport a liquid using a sieve? There are different ways, right? You need to, if you want to have enough water to transport to put out a fire, for example, what if the liquid needs to be viscous enough so that it won't immediately fall through the sieve, or the holes need to be fixed? Okay, so we have three things: the flow of the liquid, the number of holes in the sieve, which is the gaps, and the viscosity of the liquid, how easy it is for individual molecules to leave, to separate from that larger amount of liquid. So how can we apply this to diversity initiatives? You mentioned about, oh, it isn't just hiring more and more women, right? That is the flow. So
Okay.
if you want to have enough liquid, you need to have enough pouring in, if we know that there's always going to be some stragglers that fall out. So when it comes to diversity initiatives, we need more and more women.
Okay.
We need more and more women to fall into that pool so that we can compensate for the women that inevitably leave that pool. Then at the same time, we also want to build a close-knitted culture, an open, welcoming culture, so that we minorities and women, they don't feel inclined to leave that pool. So that can be things like benefits, flexible work arrangements, feeling like they are supported when they are sharing their experiences and their suggestions. So that's where the viscosity of basically the sticking together power of the pool, right?
Okay.
Then you have the holes. You have the holes in the container that we are using to transport water, right? So those holes are basically the gaps in our institutions. The reasons why women are leaving the industry is not just a company's benefits, right? It's also the issues that happens in the larger industry, not just any company. So when it comes to diversity initiatives, it's really three huge things that institutions, companies have to continually work on. And for many companies, they just focus on one of those aspects. That's what I mean by the diversity sieve.
Okay. So Dr. Lim then, I know, has this very interesting analogy about the diversity sieve. Then what's your take on the leakage of women in STEM then, of them leaving the industry?
There has been a discussion on not using the pipe analogy.
Okay.
But I really don't have any other better analogy to come up with. But anyway, the leaky pipeline, right? So that's what there's like basically the mid-career droppers and then shifters, or what you call. That part certainly is the career stage at which we do lose quite a bit of women. And I think that why it's always still a question. People have come up with various different kinds of hypotheses. So that's the subject of the study that we're currently working on. And so I personally do not want to comment on it yet, but we would like to hold that result, and when we're ready next year, we'll share.
Okay. Yeah, but I guess popular culture and what we read usually points towards women entering parenthood. They get married, they get kids, and decide to drop out from the workforce, and maybe the priorities change, right?
But that's just workforce, or is it workforce in STEM, right? There's a difference there.
Okay, maybe I just want to shift towards the gender pay gap then, and which is also a bit muddled because the gender pay gap in general is 6%, right? How great is this pay gap in STEM?
Okay, I guess it depends on the country, it depends on the industry, but I feel like even for me, I'm still learning so much about how women are being paid less because of different considerations. One is many people saying, oh, women in general are paid less than men in the same industry because they prefer roles that use more of a woman's soft skills versus technical skills. And technical skills are generally paid more. We see this in comparing a UI UX designer versus software developer.
Okay.
So one thing is, they have different roles where women have less paying, more artistic, more soft skills centric jobs. Another thing is people look at the lifetime earnings. A man in general, once he enters the workforce, he doesn't really need to leave the workforce to bear children like women, right?
Yep.
Basically, when a woman is pregnant, they will take off like months off to not only have the child, but also to recover, to take care of the child. So that's another consideration about women having to leave the workforce for a period of time. Then you have the third consideration where women, even if they are done being pregnant, right? Women traditionally are the first people in a parental unit to be contacted for household chores, for childcare. And so that means if, let's say, a child has an accident in school, usually it's the woman, the mother, the wife who is being called up to leave work to take care of that child versus the father. So all this generally means that women are seen as not only less technical, but also they leave work more often than men. So because of that, there is this gender pay gap. But that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, and this is something that is still being discussed, that I'm still learning about, where there are male and female employees talking together and realizing that, hey, we have the exact same job title, we have the exact same qualifications, yet you as a man are being paid higher. And here's the tricky thing that happens in the workplace. In some workplaces, it's written in the contract that you cannot discuss your salary. You can discuss
the infamous NDA, right?
Exactly. So either it's an NDA or it's just frowned upon socially. Even if there is a gender pay gap, at least for me, there is so much contention because, oh, how can you be sure that this thing is happening if we don't even talk about our salaries? So that's why, even for me, talking about the gender pay gap, there's always the ums and us and the ifs, because it's tricky to talk about salary even outside of a diversity perspective. So at least for me, I'm not entirely sure whether how bad the gender pay gap is, but I do know that the gender pay gap is happening, because if women are being treated differently in the workspace, even if they have the same qualifications, I'm not surprised that they are being paid differently than men.
Okay. In Europe, in fact, they are actually trying to close the STEM gender gap, and the pay is it the pay or the GDP is going up by a little bit, like 2.2 to 3%?
Right off the top of my head, I remember when I was in university, especially, some people are saying that in the US, because in tech, usually people talk about the US market, the gender pay gap of a woman in the US versus a man is how, I think, a woman makes 70 to 80 cents for every dollar a man makes. In Europe, especially in more egalitarian societies like Finland, basically many countries in Europe, Nordic countries basically, the gender pay gap is a lot smaller. I'm not too sure what are the statistics they are for Singapore, but there is a gender pay gap in every country.
Okay. Then, short of like sharing salary information, or what do you think we can reduce this gap then?
I think generally, for me, what I found helpful, especially when you talk about gender diversity in any industry, is salary transparency in general. So in Singapore, we have this website called Noteflare. Noteflare is a website where people can say, hey, I work this job and this is my salary. So to really have that culture of salary transparency. And it's similar to what Glassdoor does, except it's a websites like Noteflare. The US version is levels.fyi. Both of them require the user to submit income proof that they are actually making the money that they are making. So that sort of validates that the income that they make. But basically, when people know the general range, the income range that they are expected to make, then I feel like that sorts of reduces the pay gap between a man and woman, because now both of them have knowledge about how much in general they are supposed to be paid. Having that knowledge is immensely powerful. So salary transparency in general, on a global community level rather than just within companies. And also, I feel another aspect that we need to talk about when it comes to reducing the gender pay gap is giving both the man and woman, both the husband and wife, basically the mother and father, to encourage a more balanced distribution of childcare and household chores, basically. I think even right now, and I think a woman gets more maternity leave than a man, if I remember correctly,
Correct.
in Singapore especially. And I feel like this is one thing, this is a tricky thing. On one hand, yeah, of course, a woman gets more maternity leave because she's the one actually giving birth and having to recover from a surgery. But does that mean that fathers who genuinely want to be involved in childcare, who want to help out their wives especially, I know men who want to help out their wives more, would this large difference in parental leave, both parents having a more equal, a more balanced distribution of childcare leave, would that make it easier for the gender pay gap to shrink? Could, I don't know, public campaigns encouraging men, encouraging husbands to take a larger share of household management instead of just leaving everything to their wives, could that help improve the gender pay gap in general? So ultimately, what I see is it's still a community effort, right? It isn't just industry specific or company specific. It isn't just men versus women. It is men and women working together to fix a community problem.
So I guess in conclusion, maybe we have a wrap up. What is one thing we wish for in order to reduce the gender gap? Maybe we start with Dr. Lim first.
I think we need to continually create a supportive environment. I think that's my whole thesis here, from the family to the school, to the university, to then the working environment.
Okay, Ainul?
So I think if we want to reduce this gender gap, it starts from realizing that it is a serious issue that affects the entire community, not just a certain gender, not just women. Because all of us know women in our lives, or we are women ourselves. So if we want to fix a problem that affects one part of the community, everyone in the community has to be involved. So that's where, to follow up what the doctor said, it isn't just understanding that these things happen. It is also actively doing something, taking action, and truly understanding one another and chipping in without being asked to support our entire community rather than just see it as, oh, only they need help, if that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Thank you all for listening in. I would like to thank my guests, Dr. Sierin Lim and Ainul Md Razib, for their time today. Thank you all. See you on the next episode of On Diversity. On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. We are available on all major podcast platforms. Please follow or subscribe to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website, ipscommons.sg, for more information.